So let's wait 1 minute to be sure that. Okay, we are on air. Fantastic. So, okay, so here we are. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this live streaming. My name is Francisco Javier, founder of the Hospitality Robotics Group, a community with more than 5,000 professionals interested in robotics, AI, and automation in hospitality and food service industries. Today's session is very special. It's part of our 5,000 members milestone celebration, and I'm extremely happy to welcome Jessica Kramer. Jessica is the operating partner at Techne Infiniti Ventures, a global venture capital fund that invests in AI, robotics, and hospitality innovation. So, Jessica, thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Definitely excited for the conversation.
I'm very excited too. And before giving the floor to Jessica, I would like to share a short reflection. Nowadays, venture capital plays a central role in the development of new technologies. VCs are not just investors, but also builders, mentors, and accelerators of innovation. Without their support, many excellent ideas would stay in the lab and never reach real customers or markets. Just before starting, just one note for everyone watching live. If you have any questions or comments to the Jessica talk, just please write them in the LinkedIn chat. I will try to keep an eye on the chat, and I will try to take some of the most relevant questions and reflection at the end. So Jessica, the floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Well, it's really nice to be here. I think what you said is exactly right, Francisco. You know, at Techne Infiniti Ventures, we are a venture capital fund, but we also have a scaler program. And in our scalers, we work directly with our portfolio companies to help them get from traction to scale. So we're bringing in companies anywhere from seed to Series B. Some of these companies, of course, are in robotics, and others in all sorts of other AI, SaaS, cybersecurity, all different areas, primarily B2B SaaS. And we're working with them so that they can get their go-to-market right, find their product market fit, and also be successful at fundraising. So that's really how we think about it. You know, I think most venture capital will tell you that they do what you said, that they help, that they are invested, but we have actual dedicated resources, including myself, to work just in that area, right? So that's you know, what it means to be an operating partner. I work with our businesses on their business. And so that's a sort of unique position to be in, and one that's very exciting.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this introduction. So yeah, maybe you can explain more about your role in the development of innovation. What you look in the robotics companies? What you expect from there? How you decide? Let's say how you decide, or you look potentially in a company to invest.
Sure. Well, you know, so a robotics company is not particularly different than any sort of company looking for venture capital, but I think, you know, the main thing to understand is that the funding will follow the focus, and, you know, venture capital will back robotics businesses that combine predictable unit economics, defensible technology, and then scalable go-to-market, just as we would do in SaaS or in any other area, right? So what that means in hospitality is that, you know, we invest in robotics companies that replace predictable, repeatable labor pain points and deliver measurable ROI, right? So it doesn't mean that robots can't be fun or novel, but, you know, we're way past the stage in hospitality where a robot can just be a novelty, right? Now, a robot can be an experience, right? If you're addressing guest experience and there's a measurable ROI to how you help guests, interact with, let's say, a humanoid concierge or something like that. But I think the primary interest in robots in hospitality right now is to take over those predictable, repeatable, mundane tasks and really solve labor pain points with a clear return on that investment. And that's really what we're looking for, in venture capital. And then, just having those clear unit economics and that distribution go to market is really where we're going to look. Now, one thing that's a little bit more complicated in many cases about venture-backed robotics is that you're putting a huge investment in upfront to get these robots to function and work, right? And so this creates a challenge for the venture, investor who, wants to see that traction, right? Wants to see that you've moved past like a pilot or a pilot here and there into a repeatable rollout stage, right? And so, it's also about finding the right venture investor for the stage you're at, because the expectations are going to look a little bit different depending on what stage you're at, right? So at that pre-seed stage or seed stage, you are going to be focused on your prototype and your first pilot customers. And then, venture is going to be looking for proof of concept in real hotel environments, right? Like actual functioning hotels, early unit economics, and a founding team that has experience in hospitality and robotics, because this is a very different type of company to build than a SaaS, software company. And then at the Series A stage, it's going to look more like scaling deployments, right? Refining the unit economics and having a more mature go-to-market, a flywheel, right? As we like to say. So, venture capital at that stage is really looking for the repeatable playbooks, the recurring revenue model, having some partnerships in place, right? All those things that are going to create scaled growth. And then, what is the use of funds that you're looking for, right? How are you going to ramp the manufacturing? Where are you hiring for key roles like sales, right? And revenue roles. And then what is the service network plan? And then as you continue to grow and you're in those growth rounds, which is, where you really, the capital, it's very capital intensive at the beginning. And then as you really start to grow, it can also be very capital intensive because, of course, robots are expensive to build and deliver, right? And so in those growth rounds, you're going to be focused on getting national and international rollouts. How do you get your manufacturing costs down? And what is your service infrastructure to have those unit economics that are workable? And at that stage, venture capital is going to be looking at strong KPIs, defensibility, right? Like we like to say, what is your moat, right? Why couldn't someone just go build a robot exactly like this? Especially, sometimes it's hard to be the first mover, right? Because you've given everyone the prototype for what will work. And then, and that's where also distribution contracts really matter. And then on that use of funds level, it's about getting warehouses and service centers and your supply chain right? Because that's how you're going to be in a position to continue to scale. And especially when you're in that scaling phase, that's all really important.
Thank you. Really, really interesting. Yeah, sometimes, let's say, of course, robotics is a complicated field because there are many software implications, but as well many hardware implications. And always in the hardware industry, we feel that sometimes we are not so, let's say, interesting because there are many costs in the beginning of prototyping, deploying at least the first, let's say, the first MVPs, and that make everything at least more costly in the very first stages. Probably one of the key points is, let's say, looking for the right venture capitals in the right different stages, no, that maybe can find your company, let's say, interesting. So yeah, just one question from your perspective: which kind of robots are, let's say, maybe the key types right now, and how you see that they fit in the hospitality industry?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of them, right? I mean, hospitality is about 1/10 of the world's GDP, or travel and hospitality, and 1 in 11 people work in this tourism industry. So there's a lot of opportunity to deliver. I think what we are seeing in hospitality is autonomous mobile robots and delivery robots, right? So think in hotel delivery, airport, terminal, bag delivery, internal logistics, right? That's, might be linen, mini bar, room service, right? All of these areas where you're doing a very discrete task. And that's a high labor substitution area of ROI, right? Someone could be doing something more important, more guest facing, more valuable, and you get measurable time savings. There's also, of course, automated or autonomous guided vehicles, right? So that's where you've got a fixed path of movement. Think back of house laundry, kitchens, right? Even golf courses and some of the basics at resorts. And that's where you're going to have, the ROI of reduced manual handling and, moving goods. Service and guest facing robots, right? This is, separate from what we would call humanoids. These are just more simple, maybe. And that might be check in, check out, info kiosks, wayfinding, right? Maps, that kind of thing. And, that's going to reduce the front desk load and improve response time. And by the way, there's all sorts of blends of software as a service with actual robotics, that you might see in each of these categories. You're also going to see the humanoid robots, like I mentioned. That's going to be more novelty concierge events, right? That's something that people are increasingly interested in, but also they're a little unpredictable still, right? So you want your humanoid robot to be very predictable in a hotel setting. There's, of course, cleaning and sanitation robots, and we saw that really growing during the pandemic, and there's a growing need, but it's complicated, right? Because guest rooms might be different, in their layout, and you really have to get these right. But that's something that, post COVID, I think an interest in sanitation is really a big one. You've got robotic arms. There's all sorts of kitchen implications for that, right? So you see that a lot, in the F&B side with dishwashing, cooking robots, inventory handling, right? How do you get a clear idea of how much alcohol is on your bar, that kind of thing. And that can help with needing less skilled labor. And then you see drones, right? And drones are outdoor property surveillance. You see them on the e-commerce side for photography and really giving that, bird's eye or drone's eye view of the property, and inventory, right? Large resort implications, even delivery. And, that's another, kind of niche area that we're starting to see. So there's a lot of different types of robots, and sometimes we don't even think of, things we don't really think of as robots, like a dishwasher, are technically a robot. So there are many use cases of robots in hotels that we've been using for many years, but increasingly we are seeing a lot of different types of robots with use cases in hospitality, on both the restaurant side and the hotel side.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Yeah, there are many robots that people don't identify as robots, but actually there are robots, and in many cases are the most profitable robots. I'm also happy that you mentioned all the let's say all the indoor delivery robots and cleaning robots. I work in that industry, and yes, to be honest, I can see, let's say, how there is increasing traction from the market. I see a huge interest from operators, and actually I can see the adoption increasing and growing year per year. At least in Europe in the last 2 years, I can see, and let's say it's exponential growing in adoption of those kind of robots. Probably because the operators are more familiar with them, and other types, as let's say, I don't know, cooking robots, are maybe more in early stages of development.
Yeah, exactly. And you can see that hunger for them, right? Like, I know I personally am excited for the robot in an airport to, move my bag along next side, along aside me, and get my food delivered right to my gate or even to the lounge, right? There's so many opportunities to make the travel and hospitality experience better, and even the day-to-day experience, right? Like some of the food delivery robots you're talking about, when you're in Silicon Valley, you see them bringing people's lunch in their office building all the time, right? So they are already active, and these are areas where people are familiar.
Yeah, in Europe, about the outdoor delivery robot, we have many, let's say, some issues about the regulations. You know that in Europe, we are the best ones for regulate anything. So probably here will take a little bit more of time, but there are already some pilot tests here and there. Just a question that I think most of our let's say members that are attending the session are very interested in. I would like to know what investors evaluate where approaching, let's say, a startup in the robotics area or a new project. What you evaluate? What you look at?
Yeah, well, I mean, like I said, it's going to vary a little bit by stage, but it's really going to come down to three key areas, right? They're going to evaluate the risk, the repeatability, and then the scalability, right? So risk is really the technical risk, right? Like, is it going to be messy? Does it work in this type of hotel, right? Like, if you take Danny Meyer, who's the most famous restaurateur in America, perhaps, or at least up there, he famously had his first restaurant had stairs everywhere, right? Well, that alone might make it impossible for a robot to function, whereas a single level or elevators would really increase things. So that's the technical risk, the perception, navigation, manipulation, and reliability. And then you're going to have the operational risk, right? So how easy is it to deploy? How often is there downtime, right? What's the maintenance like, right? And these are important things. How will you keep spare parts or fix a robot that goes down, and how dependent is your business on it, and how dependent are you on local integrators or specialized technicians if you accept this, right? So I built operations platforms in hotels for many years across several companies, and one of the things we knew is, like, if your system is necessary for operations, it can't go down, right? It absolutely has to have complete uptime. So same thing for robots in your hotel setting, right? If it is an operational risk, if it goes down, that has to be considered. Then there's commercial risk, right? So will people pay for it? Is it CapEx? Is it OpEx, right? How long is the sales cycle going to be, right? And is that sustainable, because venture capital has certain expectations around that. And, even a robotics company has to be able to keep up with those expectations, but there might be very long sales cycles for something very new, right? There's safety and regulatory risk, right? I think you just mentioned that in Europe, right? What are the local laws saying? What kind of safety certifications? Where's the liability if something goes wrong, right? And does that present risk? And then the customer concentration or channel risk, right? Because a lot of times we get one pilot and then one big rollout, and then we're sort of very reliant on that customer, right? So having your eggs in a few different baskets is really important for venture capital to assess that risk. On the repeatability side, it's really about like cross property product fit and segmentation, right? Does it work across every segment of hotels? Are you very clear on the segment that it would apply to, right? Can you standardize the installation and implementation? What APIs and integrations are necessary, right? This is our challenge in every single area of hospitality, always these integrations with the PMS, the POS, operations platforms, right, etc. And then, the service play, right? So how do you have a managed service uptime guarantee, right? And give people that comfort around that as they scale it within their own organization. Because keep in mind, when it comes to repeatability, change management is huge too, right? The employees are living with these robots and getting used to working with these robots, and so that alone is something that comes into consideration. And then there's, of course, the scale side, right? So for scaling, what matters is the same things that matter for scaling in every venture-backed business, right? What are the unit economics, right? What do your gross margins look like? And what's your payback period on the hardware, right? That can be really killer in a hardware business as opposed to a software business, right? Where you're looking at the LTV to CAC, which is, if anyone doesn't know, the long-term value to the cost of acquisition, right? So oftentimes that can be very backwards in robotics compared to software. And so, that's something to look at. What is the SAM, right? How many hotels and restaurants, et cetera, fit the product profile worldwide? Is there a large enough audience to make this venture investable? Distribution, how are you going to sell it, right? Is it going to be OEM partners, integrators? Is it through the franchise chains, which are, notoriously long sales cycles and also not necessarily going to push your robot through all of their brands as a requirement, right? And how do you get them to do that, right? And then the manufacturing and supply chain, right? I mean, as an investor, you want to know there's an ability to produce that hardware at scale, but also, that if there were an issue with one manufacturer, one piece of the supply chain, that you would have a backup plan, right? So if you come from a certain country and you've been using labor and manufacturing and supply chain in that country, and there's an issue in that country, right? So we saw this very clearly a few years ago with Ukraine, right? And Russia, right? If you were building something, if all of your engineers were there, if the banks get cut off, right? These things that seem sort of unimaginable, just like a global pandemic seems unimaginable. What's the backup plan? What's the ability to pivot? Because that's what really matters at scale, right? And again, not having all of your eggs in one basket, but at the same time having really appealing unit economics. So that can be, really, really hard.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's fascinating. It's fascinating. Very, very interesting. Hear what you what you are sharing with us. Just maybe one question before maybe passing to another point of the conversation. When evaluating, let's say, a project or opportunity to invest, because okay, you mentioned, for example, scalability, many points, but how you evaluate the team and the people inside of the project? How you think is important sometimes versus the, let's say, versus the idea or the technology in itself? No, because in my opinion, not from the investment, because I'm not an investor, but from, let's say, from the operation, from the field, sometimes I can see that the right team can do something great, even with, let's say, an average idea. And sometimes when an amazing idea, the grown people, maybe not because they are wrong, but maybe because the wrong relationship with them, then it can make everything fail. So how much is important the team, the people behind the project?
I mean, the team is so important in venture capital investment and in the success of startups and scale ups, that it really can't be underestimated. I do think it's like a bit art and a bit science to evaluate the team. The most clear thing is domain experience, right? So everyone loves to invest in multi-time founders, right? If you've done this before, if you've built this flywheel, right? So, I led go to market over 4 or 5, 6 startups in the hospitality space, and I've worked with over 100 companies. Overall across the entire ecosystem. You get better at it, right? You might not get the go to market right every time, but you certainly know things that aren't going to work, right? And you learn from having done it. So I think domain experience is very important, and hospitality is very nuanced, right? So one of the things we do at Techne, and one of the things we do in the scaler, is we help people who are from outside of hospitality and travel come into hospitality and travel. And that's a lot about understanding use cases and really working within that ecosystem to get the feedback, take the feedback, and understand where all that nuance is. At the same time, we're not looking for teams that are made up of just hospitality operators, because that success in building products and having been particularly in the area of robotics in that area before is just so important. So you really want your team to be a blend, experienced people, who have built companies before, people who come from the domain, and people who have that functional expertise, right? And certainly when we look at founders, when any venture capital looks at founders, we want to see technical expertise and business expertise, right? We don't look at single founder companies. The expectation is that you will have at least 2 founders, and we love teams with 3 founders as well, where everyone has a clear value to add and a clear focus. Because especially in the beginning, when you're working 24/7, right? If you're trying to be the engineer and the business person, the salesperson, the leader, it's very, very hard, right? And so getting multiple people who are really able to do the job and ready to give that energy and equally invested in the business is super important. And then of course, it also matters for the team, how deep are they invested, right? Every founder, but even every early team member should have equity in the business, so that they are highly incentivized toward the ultimate outcome, right? So you don't want to be paying huge salaries to people. Obviously we want everyone to have a living wage, and this is one of the
Sure,
reasons
yeah.
you get investment, right? But you also want everyone to be highly incentivized, and at the same time that you have to have more than one founder. You can't have 5 or 6, right? You really have to have a bit of a streamlined process, so that as you have dilution and across rounds, the equity, goes more into the hands of investors, everyone is still highly incentivized, and the outcome is going to be such that that team really wants to stay and build and grow, and there's room for other people to come in as you grow that, have that experience and have done that before, right? So you're not going to necessarily hire a chief financial officer or a legal counsel from day one, but when that person comes, you have to have some equity left for them. So like the organization and structure of the team. And then it's also the personalities, right? The biggest thing that we look at, is really coachability, right? Can you take feedback? Can you, take feedback and work with it and be, excited about it, but, and not sort of take it personally or feel like you're being criticized, et cetera, because your ability to pivot and modify your plan and change what you're doing and see how the market responds and alter your approach is so important. It's like, one out of a million, I'm just going to say, that's not science, but where you just have the perfect idea, the perfect team, and you just set out to do what you were going to do, and you build it and you go, and it's exactly as you expect it to be, right? That never happens. It's
Yeah, that never
always
happened.
different than you thought, and you're modifying it, and even at the different stages, you might need slightly different teams. And that's something we look at as well, right? Do you have the right person in the right seat for the right stage of company?
Yeah. No, it's very, very interesting what you mentioned. Not maybe you don't need, as you say, no, maybe you don't need, let's say, chief financial officer in the pre-seed or in the very early stages. Just maybe have a balanced team between the technical, let's say, the technical side and the commercial one, of course, because someone has to sell the robots, not just produce them. So, speaking about selling the robot or whatever the, let's say, the startup sales, which kind of let's say of business models are more interesting for let's say for VCs or to get funds?
Well, there's a number of different approaches that can work. So, I think it's really about having a clear go to market. But, I think that there's a couple things to consider, right? Like the anchor customers and pilots. So you need to have medium size and large chains for credibility and rapid rollouts, right? And you have to have those anchor customers and pilots commit to rolling out, right? One of the things we see over and over again in hospitality is like, what I would call a hunting license, right? So you get Marriott or Hyatt or Hilton or IHG or Extended Stay America, any brand to agree to roll, to test your product and pilot with you, but then there's no real expectation or standard or agreement contract around, okay, how do you go to the next stage, right? So having that clear pilot process that results in a full rollout is very important. I think operator partnerships, right? Finding those, maybe partners that are willing to have a design partnership and they give you feedback and you work with them to get a full rollout so that you've got the management company or the brand really invested. That's where a lot of the mid-sized brands can be very valuable, right? So I've worked extensively in the past with Strawberry and Posadas and Stay Pineapple and Lowe's Hotels and Resorts, right? These kind of mid-sized brands, anywhere from like 10 to 300 hotels, and they can really act as partners and design partners to get that product market fit exactly right. But of course, you have to be careful that you're not building for one customer, but really for the entire market. There's integrators and systems integrators, right? That's really important in robotics, right? So you can utilize existing building automation, cleaning service providers, right? And embed the robots into the existing service offerings, right? So can your robot sit on top of someone else's software, right? So if it's a housekeeping software and a housekeeping robot, or a cleaning service provider that goes into lots of different hotels, right? And there's a version of that for every area of the hotel, right? Hardware OEM channels, right? So white labeling with existing established hardware makers, that makes for faster manufacturing, right? So, someone who's going to build your kiosk might already build door locks or some other, technology in the hotel. Platform and API partnerships, right? So where can you find partners that are in similar areas that are already going to market or have a successful market, right? Can you partner with Stay in Touch or Cloudbeds or Amadeus or, Hospitality Solutions, which is Saber's, new company, right? These big players that have a very clear go-to-market can make for very powerful partnerships, and especially where there's an API and you have a product partnership, right? I know my friend Justin Call over at Actable, he focuses in on partnerships, but very specifically on how do you make both products better as a result of being partnered, right? And that's where I think, there can be a lot of power. And then like leasing and equipment, right? So where you have CapEx heavy hardware, you can work with lessors so that operators can turn that into OpEx, right? So you're renting the robot instead of buying it. That can be very valuable, and financial partners can be really, really important. But that's kind of on the go-to-market side, what's going to help you get to scale and scale more quickly, right? Because if you go one by one in robotics, you'll never have, unit economics that can possibly make sense. You can't sell to one hotel at a time, except maybe for a single pilot. And even then, you want to sell it to a group so that you then can go to the rest of the hotels and say, look how well this works, right?
You probably won't. Yeah, right. No. It's very interesting, because I think you mentioned some key points that I can also see in my everyday experience. As one is probably the APIs integration of the product, because probably maybe not long time ago, but maybe 3-4 years ago, I saw that most of operators, at least let's say in the hospitality industry of the service, used to consider the robot almost like a standalone product. But now that the market is becoming, let's say, a little bit more mature, or more, let's say, more, the operators learn more about the robotics technology, they consider the robot, for example, like a product inside of a wider ecosystem. So to work inside of this ecosystem, the product need to be integrable with other devices, other software systems, other hardware, like probably other robots many times. So yeah, probably this is one of the key points. And about the business model, yeah, you mentioned the renting or leasing the robotics as a service in a let's say in a wider way. And yeah, probably what I can see that probably nowadays I think probably 80 to 90% of my distributor sales is through some kind of let's say service agreement. So it's most of the times operators try to don't buy hardware, because as you know, in the hospitality industry, many times the management company is not the same that maybe owns the real estate assets. So in the case of CapEx, you need to make agree both of companies, so make everything much more difficult. much more difficult. So
yeah, you're trying to find a business model that will have, the least long sales cycle, right? So you want to shorten that sales cycle. So like robotics as a service with a subscription, and a managed service contract, hardware sales, that also have a SaaS component that kind of lock people in, right? Managed operations and shared service, revenue share, right? Deal the hotel in, right? If you do well, they do well. That's also something, that can help justify the ROI. And then, of course, we see like marketplace and platform plays, right? So aggregation of robots, and some network effects, right? And that, we've seen that on the hardware side for hotels with things like door locks and smart devices, right? So I think there's an opportunity on the robotic side for companies to build lots of different types of robots and come together, in that kind of robotics platform approach. So, I do think as the industry matures, we'll see players that have lots of different types of robots and, kind of different categories.
yeah, true. Yeah, because at the end, the market is made by integrators. So most of the times, the integrators have even different brands, or for sure, let's say a very big portfolio of robots for different, let's say, solution for different pinpoints from the delivery to maybe cleaning or so on. So just another question. I think time is passing so quickly, so we are almost running out the time. But okay, we'll try to go very fast on those last points. Which metrics or KPIs VCs care more about?
Well, it's never an either or, right? Like your investors always want everything, right? So, VCs are just at the end of the day investors. So, the big metric is of course going to be return on investment, right? I mean, so anytime you're meeting with a VC, like do not forget that you're doing a sale and that person is asking themselves, for every dollar I put in, how many dollars am I going to get out, right? So that's the biggest metric of all. But if you look at, what is the VC going to examine when they're in your data room, when they're really looking, at your performance, it's going to be, revenue and growth, especially, ARR, right? Annual recurring revenue is so much stickier than any other type of revenue, right? Like, is the person committed to continuing to buy? If you have a product that you sell once and you're not sure if you're going to sell it again, that's, less appealing revenue, because again, you have to have like a perfect sales system, unit economics, which we talked about a lot. Customer metrics, especially as you scale, become really important, right? So we're going to be looking at churn, right? Or NRR, which is net revenue retention. So, how much of the revenue you sell are you managing to retain? And again, like when we say LTV to CAC, right? Like what's the long-term value of every customer you bring in based on their life cycle, right? Then you've got your operational metrics, which are uptime, repair time, right, et cetera. Adoption, how much is the robot really being used, right? And what kind of service tickets do you have coming out of that use? So it's not great if someone buys something from you, but then they don't really engage with it. And that's something I think a lot of companies forget to really be measuring, right? Like how much are people engaging with this product? Sales efficiency, right? What's your cost of acquisition and your payback period? And then what's your pipeline look like, right? So qualified pipeline by number of rooms and properties. And that's where what I was talking about before with the, the hunting license versus the guaranteed contract, right? So like I like to structure contracts as a go-to-market person where there's a 90-day out or whatever our pilot period is going to be, but you're signing a contract for your entire group. So you have your pilot time to determine whether it works, but if it works, you've got a rollout plan right in that contract, right? Versus, hey, we just got approved by XYZ brand, and now I have to call every single franchisee and go sell it to them. That's great to get that approval, but from a go-to-market and pipeline perspective, as a venture capitalist, especially as an expert in the industry and a vertical fund, I'm going to look at that, with Marriott or Hilton or Hyatt, somewhat skeptically and ask you, okay, well, what are the management companies that you're building relationships with or in your pipeline that are going to help you roll out across those brands? Because, at the end of the day, you have to actually sell the product to the buyer, and permission to sell is very different than having sold.
Yeah, totally agree. True. Now, so insightful. Just because we are running out the time, and I know that you are a very, very busy person. So thank you so much for every minute that you are dedicating to us. So just to finalize this session, anyone that maybe has a project, maybe a group of founders that they have a good, let's say, robotics project, or maybe another kind of technological project for the hospitality or food service industry, which is your advice about how to approach the, let's say, the world of PCs? Many times, I think there are people with good ideas or good projects, but they don't know how to approach potential investors or how to approach the, let's say, the world of investing.
I think it's about, first of all, putting together the right team, right? So making sure that you have that blend of commercial and technical on your team, and ideally with experience. And then finding those early design partners and working through the use cases. One of the things I find, especially working with earlier stage folks on go-to-market all the time, is you may have sold a product to 100 hotels, but you're basically selling for a different use case to, all 100, right? And so until you really get to that point where everyone is buying the product to solve the same problem and seeing the same value prop of that product, you don't really have that product market fit. So honing in on the product market fit, working with design partners and early customers, and having pilots to figure out what are the use cases that we're solving for and where is their appeal. And then also, having demonstrated traction, right? So that traction looks like sales. It doesn't always need to look like revenue at the earliest stages, but the faster you get to revenue, the better. And also, the longer you can bootstrap it and pay your own way and not look to investors, the better options you will have for investors when you go to them, right? So don't spend your time trying to find investment, right? It really should look like we fund the company ourselves for as long as possible. Then we go to friends and family, right? Disinterested investors. I'm talking your Aunt Irma, right? Who doesn't ask you, well, tell me about your go-to-market playbook, but, simply says, I believe in you and I've seen you do great things before, and here's $50,000 to go do great things again, right? And that can be really hard because not everyone has that network, but that is, going to get you further along, so that when you get in front of institutional investors like venture capital or even angel investors that are specifically knowledgeable about the industry, you do have that traction to show them, and then you are in the right place with the metrics that we're talking about, the unit economics, the customer metrics, right? The adoption, the LTV to CAC, right? All the pipeline, all of those things we talked about, right? And having someone who has relationships in the industry and has sold a similar product into the industry before is really invaluable. So the faster you can find someone and add someone to your team, ideally from the beginning, but that becomes very, very important, right? And someone who has done it at that stage that you're at, right? Because it's very different to go from 0 to 1, than it is to work at a later stage company. So you don't want to hire someone from, Amadeus or Muse today to do your very earliest stage company, unless that person has done early stage over and over again. If you're used to working in a huge org with tons of help, it's very different than, being gritty and solving across every function. And, you're going to be customer success, and you're going to be sales, and you're going to be ops, and you're going to be finance for yourself. That requires someone who really is open to that, curious, and willing to do it. And then when you've proven it out a little bit, that's when you can really go to venture capital, and go to venture capital that operates at that stage, right? So there are seed stage funds. By the way, all of the AI search engines are incredible resources for this stuff. So, you can do everything today from have AI build your pitch deck to ask you the questions that venture capital is likely to ask using your pitch deck. You can learn about what are the metrics and what are the expectations around those metrics, right? So an ARR metric that you'll often see is 30% growth month on month, right? So that's kind of a growth expectation if you're looking for Silicon Valley venture capital. So, understanding all of that and teaching yourself, is really important too, and get some practice. Think about accelerators or scalar programs like, ours, that will help you really get to the place where you can go ask for the money. And then, of course, I think another important thing for hospitality folks to understand when it comes to venture capital, especially generalist venture capital, is that you need to be able to describe things in a way that non-hospitality people understand. So to you, it might be obvious that Marriott has 10,000 hotels, and you're going to roll out with Marriott, but that actually needs to be spelled out, and it might need to be spelled out all the way to the level of naming the different brands and how many hotels you have under those brands and what revenue is guaranteed to grow, or what the revenue potential is under those sub brands, right? So you might need to talk about Marriott Residence Inn, and Starwood Luxury, right? Like the different sub brands within the brand family that are out there, so that they can understand. And also, you don't want a hospitality payments company or a hospitality housekeeping robot. You want a robotics company that's focused on the vertical sector of hospitality, with traction in that sector and the ability to roll out to additional verticals such as retail or other, restaurants if you're in hotels, etc. Right? Like, tell the story that makes it really big and powerful to the investors, so that when they're asking themselves, for every dollar I put in, how many dollars am I going to get out? The answer might be $4 today, but $10 tomorrow. And that's what they really want to hear, is that unicorn company, that billion-dollar company is there. So sometimes they think hospitality is niche. Of course, we know that it has an absolutely enormous TAM, but not everyone understands that, right? That addressable market. And also they just want to see that you've thought through that vision and that you have that ambition and that you and your team are going to drive to, that place, right? And that's really what makes your company venture investable. So you have to learn to talk the talk and walk the walk sometimes.
No, thank you. I think you say something that is really true. I'm completely aligned with you. And it's that hospitality sometimes look like a niche for robotics, but actually, if you explore inside of the hospitality industry, it's a very complex industry with many different kind of segmentations, and you really need to understand the client before approaching them and know their needs, no? Because it's a kind of sector that, especially for what means consistency, rapid response, if there are any technical issues, is probably one of the most complex ones that I have approached in my career. So I totally agree with you. So I think we already ran out the time. First of all, I want to really thank you, because I know that you are extremely busy. And as I mentioned before, I really thank you for every minute that you dedicate to us. I hope we will have opportunity to talk again in the future. And thank you is all I can say. And thank you for everyone that was watching live.
Absolutely. Really happy to be here and always happy to give my time. And if folks want to reach out, I'm very findable on LinkedIn, and I'm sure I'll be linked in the feed. But I would love to, see all different, I'm happy to have a conversation with entrepreneurs who are building in the space and who are excited to hear what we're up to and, potentially, come into our scalar engagement and work with us. And I love hearing from folks. So please do feel free to reach out, and we'll get a conversation going.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So thank you, everyone, and let's stay connected.
Awesome. Thank you.